Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple. We have a Kickstarter preview today, and this one is for Onimaru. This is from Penguin and Panda Games, and also co-published by Japanime Games. It is a 2 to 4 player, mostly dice rolling co-op with a lot of mitigation, though.
Yeah, so the game revolves around Japanese folklore, and basically what we're trying to do as either samurai or ninja or some kind of magical character, trying to kill 3 different Oni. And if you're unfamiliar with what an Oni is, it's kind of a mythical beast or creature, ogre from Japanese folklore. Yeah. Typically they have horns on them, and in this case, we have 3 of them here, and each one of them is laid under the previous one, so they get progressively stronger and harder to deal with as you go through the game.
Yeah, and in this game, they're also going to have minions, or in this case, hordelings that are going to come out, and they're going to be in front of each player. They're going to be in front of them, basically serving as the lines of defense between you and the Oni themselves.
Speaking of the hordelings, there's 2 different versions. You have the basic hordelings, and then you have the more advanced ones. The more advanced ones are going to start coming out during the 2nd and 3rd Oni when you start to face them. So again, the idea behind the game is that we're trying to kill each of these 3 in progression before going through a deck of cards called the Nightfall deck. The number of cards that you use is dependent upon how hard you want the game to be. We have a 4-player game set up, and we've set up 9 cards. Now, if you're having trouble with the game, you can actually increase the number of cards. You have a little bit more time to deal with them. No matter what you do, though, it's still a very challenging game.
Yeah, it is a very challenging game, and it all comes down, like Jeremy said, to the number of those Nightfall cards. And these are going to do a number of different things because they're going to come out throughout the game. Some of them do nothing. Some of them are going to make it so you roll fewer dice, maybe roll more dice. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. So you just have to deal with those at the beginning of each round. And like we said, once you're out of those things at the beginning of the next round, you lose if you haven't won.
One of the things we should also mention as you're looking at all the components right here, this is a prototype version of the game. We are using the game trays that will ship with the final version. However, a lot of the boards aren't present at this time because they're being worked on and they're not 100% done. However, most of the art's done in the game. We're going to be talking about what we have in front of us, though. So this is the gate board. This is where new minions are going to be introduced, are placed onto, and then at the very particular parts of the rounds are going to be introduced in front of the players or in front of the Oni. The Oni boards, there's 3 different ones. You have the level 1, the level 2, and the level 3, which are both under this level 1. He has a couple different abilities, either when they're introduced or during the Oni phase. Each of them is going to have a health track, and that's going to fluctuate depending upon the number of players that you have at the table. So if you have 4 players, it's going to be more challenging in order to defeat him.
Yeah, it's really cool. The way this works modularly, you put these Oni boards above the main Oni board, which is going to line up with it. And on that, you're going to see we have the Oni attack cards. This is where the deck goes. And then each attack, there's going to be 4 of them for each Oni at any given time that you have to deal with, as well as this track here, which is going to fluctuate up and down depending on the number of dice it's going to roll. And we'll get into how that can go up in a second.
The Oni is also going to have his own line of defense, and that's going to fluctuate depending upon the number of players and how many things are introduced through the gate itself. Each of the players is going to have a game tray in front of them, and their players are going to have variable player powers depending upon who you're playing with. Some of them are based around magic dice. Some of them are just straight up hardcore fighters. They're all going to have different innate variable player powers, not only in what they inherently do with some of the tiles, but also the cards and the powers and the abilities over here on the right side of the player board.
Yeah, this is really cool, and we'll tell you about a few of these right now, but before we do, it should be known, if you've seen a game tray, you can actually flip these little tokens out, and actually, once you've played this game maybe once or a couple times, you're able to, at the beginning of the game, decide who's going to get what abilities, as long as you've got all the components for that ability, and sort of build your own characters, but they do have some recommended setups for each character.
Right. At the top of the board, each player is going to have 2 stacks of cards. These stacks of cards are the techniques that the players will have. These are going to be randomly shuffled and placed on the left and the right-hand side. These correlate to 2 very specific technique tiles at the bottom of their player boards. This is really cool because these techniques can be used for a variety of different things. These cards each have a multiple different ways of being used. There are times in the game when you roll a specific combination of dice that the power can be used in the center of the card, and that card is expended and gone for the rest of the game. However, you can also purchase this card to go underneath a very specific tile to give it one of 2 ongoing abilities for the rest of the game.
Yeah, it's really cool because if you've ever played any sort of video game, this game's going to bring out some of those memories because you upgrade your characters throughout the game. And that's not the only way you can upgrade them. There's also these little tokens over to the side that you can spend honor for. Move those over to these abilities over on the right-hand side of your board. These abilities do a number of different things, but every player is going to have one ability that is a one-time only effect and it's immediate as soon as you trigger it, and 2 ongoing effects. The rub is you only have 2 of those tokens, so throughout the game you're going to have to choose which of those ones you want to assign.
Each player is also going to be given 4 standard combat dice and then 2 mastery or specialist dice that are particular to their character. Each of these dice are going to have one of a variety of different facings on them. Most of these are ways in order to combat the different hordlings or the Oni himself. Also, a lot of the dice are going to be able to power the abilities on your player board. Certain one of these techniques and abilities require very specific combinations of dice in order to utilize those techniques.
Yeah, and the other thing you're going to end up finding on your player board, maybe not at the beginning, is honor tokens. These honor tokens are going to be used to spend towards a lot of those upgrades, but also some of those abilities on the technique cards themselves will use honor or a combination of dice and honor to fire off.
To start the game, each player is going to start with 6 health above their player board. Also, you're going to pick one of the leaders. Again, this is purely a cooperative game, so you can decide amongst the players who wants to be the leader. Whoever the leader is going to gain 1 honor or extra honor at the beginning of each of those rounds, and again, that can be freely passed between the players. Everyone's going to collect their 4 white dice and their 2 colored specialist dice, and then you're going to seed the board according to whatever Oni you have. Now, we have 3 Oni here with this copy of the game. However, there's going to be a multitude of different Oni, 9 supposedly in the Kickstarter, so you can mix and match these level 1s with different level 2s and level 3s as you play the game.
Yeah, if you can imagine, there's a lot of opportunity for stretch goals here. I think they might get to 9 or 6 to 9 in the base game, and certainly 9 or beyond with some of the stretch goals.
So when the Oni first appears and at the start of the game, it's going to trigger an instant ability. This is going to introduce new hordlings to a variety of different areas in the game. The first place is in front of the actual Oni himself. He's going to have some blockers out in front of him, so you have to go through those blockers before you can even do any damage to the Oni. He's also going to introduce an X number of hordlings in front of each of the players. So each of the players is going to have to go through their own hordlings and then the Oni's hordlings in order to damage him. So a variety of these different hordlings are going to come out, and they all have different abilities and different things that can trigger the moment that they're revealed in front of a player or in front of an Oni.
Yeah, and that starts right at the beginning of the game. So if you put your first hordling out there and it has an instant effect, you're going to do that too. And oftentimes that's going to do a number of things, but it's going to introduce potentially more hordlings into the gate, which will come out in the following round, or a number of different things.
When you look at a hordling, they have a couple different things you need to pay attention to. In the upper left is the type it is. These are referred to in very specific abilities where you can do damage to all of one particular type. It has a number of honor that you get to collect if it is in front of you when you kill that particular hordling. All of the level 1 hordlings give you 1 honor, all the level 2s give you 2. And then you're going to have a number of different dice placements over on the left-hand side. This can fluctuate depending upon the different creature that's in front of the players. These are the dice that you have to place in order to do damage to them. And some of them can be blanks and have any kind of die. Some of them are very particular and need very specific combinations of die in front of them. And then across the bottom, you're going to see a special ability. Again, these are instants. Some of them will trigger during the Oni phase, whole variety of them.
Once the table's all set up, you can actually start the game. In the preparation phase, there's a lot of things going on, and in the first round of the game, a lot of that's already taken care of, so you won't do it. But in following rounds of the game, you're going to be doing things like bringing the hordlings from the gate out onto the table, and this is important because they're going to go to the leader first and then around the table. Now you should remember that you can only have up to 4 hordlings in front of any given player. So if you've got a big stack of hordlings that you're dealing out, once all the players have 4, any excess hordlings are going to be added to the Oni's row. Have we mentioned this is a difficult game? There's a lot of things you have to defeat here, and you're going to have to go through your row and the Oni's row in order to start even doing damage to the Oni himself.
The good news is that also during the preparation phase, you can start preparing for the round by spending some of your honor. Honor can be spent in a variety of different ways. The first and probably most important, the most overlooked, is you can spend 1 honor to heal yourself. And you're going to be taking damage throughout the course of the game. You have 6 hit points to deal with, and you can spend them at a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you have 2 hit points left, you can spend 4 honor to get those 4 hit points back. The second way is you can spend 2 3, or 4 honor to put your second, third, or your first, second, or third card underneath one of these 2 techniques from the left or the right stack. Each of these stacks correlates to one of the 2 different techniques under here. When you do that, you're going to look at the card according to that technique and either put it on the top side or the bottom side. Whatever's peeking out the bottom is a power that's always going to be triggered as long as you power that particular technique through the course of the game. The last thing you can do to prepare is you can spend 3 honor to take one of your discs and put them onto one of your 3 abilities on the right-hand side. There's one that's a one-time ability. Once it's done, it's done. The other ones are ongoing abilities, and you can use them throughout the course of the game.
Yeah, so once the preparation phase is over, the fun begins. You're going to start attacking. All the players at once are going to roll their dice, and this is where things get a little loose because there's not a ton of structure or steps that you need to follow in this case, but you're going to roll all of your dice and then assign those dice. Here's some things to remember. These dice, in particular the normal attack dice, are going to have this little samurai helmet on them that is one of the sides of the dice. On any roll during this part, you're going to increase the number of dice that the Oni will eventually have when it attacks with every one of these faces you roll. There is an opportunity to do some re-rolling here too. And again, every time you roll one of these things, it's going to notch the Oni up one by one on how many dice they can roll. Up to 10, I believe, is what it's going to be in the final game. Our board's a little different here. But you want to be careful about how you use those rerolls when you do that. Otherwise, you're going to be basically taking all of the icons on your dice and assigning them however you can, wherever you can. And there are some rules to follow with the different icons.
And when we say that there's no steps to follow, we don't mean that there's no rules to follow. We simply mean that players are, at this time are going to be talking back and forth and saying, I can take care of these 2 minions, but what do you have over here? What can I contribute to you? Because most of these dice are only going to affect the things directly in front of you. However, on all these dice are shurikens, and these are things that you're going to be throwing around the board to help other people. So there's times when you want to key certain people's abilities before you key other players' abilities. So people are going to be talking back and forth to share dice and to use their dice in particular orders.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you're going to be looking at to use your dice are the hordlings right in front of you. And as we mentioned earlier, there's going to be some die spaces here along these cards. Some of them are going to be empty, and you can apply any attack die to those. And some of them are going to look and call for a very specific icon. You need to fulfill that with one of your die. If someone helps you out with a shuriken from another position, it's effectively a wild, and it's going to create a damage on this die, but it's going to create it in the topmost open spot.
And one other specific note about the mastery die, that's your color die. There is one facing on here that shows a particular type of icon. For most people, it's the shuriken, but sometimes it's the magic and so forth, but they have stars on them. That means you get a critical die whenever you roll that, even if it's done during a reroll. And you're going to take one of these 5 critical die, you're going to roll it immediately and place it off to the side of your board. This is called your reserve. You can use this at any time, but it's basically another way of getting more dice to be able to use in your pool.
Yeah, one other facing too that is particularly unique is this parry face.
Yeah.
Probably can't see this, but it is a 2 hands holding a sword. The parry face is not going to be used to attack anything, but it's going to be used for defense. Along the bottom of your board, there's these 4 slots that correlate to the 4 attacks that the Oni might take during their phase. You're going to put a parry dice in any of those slots for whatever parry dice you have, and hope for the best once the Oni attacks. And the Oni attacking is the next phase.
Once all the players have rolled their dice and assigned them to as many of the hordlings or the Oni as possible, then you go into the Oni phase itself. The Oni is going to roll dice equal to whatever he is on this particular track. When he rolls these dice, he is looking for combinations that match the actual Oni cards that are below the board itself. And you're going to go through those from left to right, finishing at the top of the board here, because each of the Oni has their own innate ability as well.
Right, and what's really interesting about this is you don't use those dice as you go through these attacks. So for instance, if we did this attack and I'd rolled 2 fists, that attack will go off, but those 2 fists will also apply to any other attack that uses fists in this one roll. And the Oni is going to roll 4 times. If you happen to go through all of the attacks, including his innate attack, and none of them trigger, you're going to add 1 more die to the next roll. And like we said, we're going to roll 4 times that way, go through triggering whichever attacks the Oni can get triggered, and then that's going to be the end. One other thing to keep in mind here, as you look at these cards, there's these little banners here in the middle, and this is going to do one of a couple different things. First, if this attack triggers, obviously there's going to be some result on the card, but above that you're going to look there. This one is green, so all of the hordlings around the board that are green are also going to trigger. Some of those will have an ability that triggers when that happens, some of them won't. But this is basically the Oni commanding those hordlings to do their attack, do their evil against you. Also, those parrying dice that we placed at the beginning, depending on which one fired off. This fired off in the 1 slot. If I'd put a parry dice in the 1 slot, I'm able to block this. So this card is not going to affect me. We should also point out these cards affect all players at the table. So when it says suffer 1 damage, all players are going to suffer 1 damage unless they've parried. On top of that, if my character's innate color happened to be green, I'm able to then roll this very die to do an immediate counterattack against the Oni and get some damage in. Now that's going to happen even if I have hordlings in front of me. If it has hordlings in front of itself, that damage is going to go through.
So what should happen if you are killed during this phase? Well, a couple things are going to happen. The trickier and worst thing is that it's going to cycle one of those Nightfall cards out. So the game is going to truncate by having anyone at the table killed. So you're going to do that entire phase, the Oni phase. Hopefully you're able to kill them. Let's talk about what happens if you are able to kill him before the Oni phase happens. If that happens, you do a hard reset in the game, basically. You're going to remove all the hordlings, not only in front of the Oni, but also in front of each of the players. Then you're going to take that particular Oni board and you're going to flip it over and put it underneath of the bottom. This new Oni could introduce new hordlings into the game. Particularly this one here is going to introduce some of the level 2 hordlings in the game. So the game is going to get progressively harder. Also, his health could be more and he could have special abilities that come into play. Plus, the hordlings or the Oni that previously died is going to add an ability into that new Oni, which is really, really unique.
Yeah, it really ramps up the difficulty here because that Oni is going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And you're going to basically be doing this Oni after Oni, hopefully getting through and killing all 3 Onis. Now, we can tell you this is a challenging co-op game. If you think this is a pushover of a game, you are absolutely wrong. It can be beat, but it is challenging, particularly on normal, hard, or really difficult settings.
So that is Onimaru. It is a 2 to 4 player game, purely cooperative. If you guys have any questions about the game, please make them in the comments below. And always go to the Kickstarter page. Obviously, this was prototype version that you saw in front of you. They'll have all the final components there. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.